Playtime's just beginning.
I would like to highlight that the level of the class is beginner and intermediate, so it should be suitable for anyone below diamond, low diamond. So we're gonna talk a little bit about champion pool because that's a pretty frequent question: is how should a champion pool look like? What should it revolve around? What are the goals of the champions that you play, and how you should play according to their strengths? Early game planning, what you want to do, when you want to do it, trading patterns. Again, just kind of making your trades more efficient. Camera control and roaming are kind of connected together, so trying to impact the map outside of your lane. Wave management, we're not gonna go into like super advanced wave management, but we're gonna talk a little bit about slow pushes, about freezes. This was just basics, but it's something that is kind of skipped over by a lot of players and can help you quite a lot. We're gonna have Q&A time, and some of you submitted of some of your games, so I'll also go over those ones. So I think most of you know me, but for any new faces that we have around, I've been working as a professional coach for 7 years now. I've been master on several roles and diamond as a top lane as well, worked with Grandmaster Challenger teams, and I've also been a coach in several different gaming platforms, as well as coaching and lecturing at an esports college. So let's talk a little bit about the champion pool and your goals. So usually divide into mages and assassins. There are a few outliers, and we'll briefly talk about them as well. Usually the good size for your champion pool is 3 to 4 champions. It's the most optimal size, and generally smaller pools help you to be more consistent and make less misplays. If you practice more, your mechanics are going to be better, your combo is going to be better, your CSing is going to be better. Basically everything is going to be better, because most players only get between like 3 to 5 games a day, and obviously depending on the player, not everyone is going to be playing every single day. So the less games you play, the less time you have to practice, and it's better to have a smaller champion pool so you can actually just perform well. Usually getting good at the champion requires you to play at least 30 games on it, and generally my recommendation is, if you're adding something new, do your games. I advise doing them in a row, working hard on your mechanics, working on your CSing, your trading, getting into like a really good hang of your champion first. So in your champion pool, you need at least one champion that you can blind, so something that is either safe or relatively safe. It can be just your best champion that you feel most comfortable on, and something that you feel like, okay, whatever I face, I should still be okay with this. Or it can also be something that is pretty strong in the meta, that you feel confident on. So champion should suit your strengths, and I suppose this comes down a little bit as to you as a player and how you approach the game, because certain people would like to go with, like flashy plays, pentakills, going for the risky outplays, and some people absolutely thrive on that. So you should play champions that kind of allow you to do that, right? And that is generally assassins for this type of a player. If you put that same kind of player on a mage, by all means, it's not impossible to still go for this kind of thing, but it's probably enabling them less to do like all those flashy plays, especially in the early game. Obviously, other type of player would be people that like to kind of play it safe, that like to play it relatively passive, so more than others. Scale up until you hit your items, playing for team fights, synergizing with your team, and they tend to be better at mages as well. And the most important thing is just pick something you like, because at the end of the day, the game is there for enjoyment, or some sort of enjoyment. And also, if you're playing something that you enjoy, if you do hit any loose streaks or like those rough games happen, at least you're still having some sort of enjoyment out of your champion, so it's actually easier to deal with it. I'm also open to providing some advice, feedback, variable session, regular sessions. I also do Q&As, so you can ask in those sessions as well. And a common question I get as well is one tricking good? And the answer is yes, it can be good, but it creates some problems and overall is not ideal for like a player growth. So while it is good because you play only one thing, and we just spoke about consistency in the smaller champion pools, so in a way this is even better because you only focus on one thing at a time. You really get to master your mechanics, your CSing, you're very, very familiar, or you should be very familiar with your champion, with what you can do, etc. The downside is that you're very limited when it comes to champ select. So you're not really able to adapt to what is going on. And that means sometimes you're going to be locking yourself into games knowing that you're already at a disadvantage from the draft point. And also, one tricking it can stall player growth. Now, again, it depends on what the player actually wants to achieve. But in general, one tricking kind of locks the player into playing only one playstyle and trying to bend the game to how they want to play it. And sometimes it doesn't work out. And as I said, it can also stall the growth a little bit of a player. So mages usually scaling AP, weak early game, hit by big power spikes on 2-3 items, usually low roaming power, so mages tend to prefer to sit in lane. Good wave clear, really powerful ults, at least for most of them. Low mobility, and they kind of tend to play for scaling in team fights. So if you're playing mages, your goals are generally to focus on CSing, focus on trading in lane, trying to keep yourself relatively safe, trying to hit your power spikes, and you generally kind of thrive on that. Then you transition into mid game, and that's when you would focus a lot more on team fights, landing those big ults and all of that. So there's obviously a few examples here. There's a lot more, but I can only fit on so many on the slides. So these are just few examples. Assassins can be both AP and AD. There's a variety. They tend to have strong early game, big power spike on first item already. So you would notice quite a lot that you get significantly stronger. High roaming power. So assassins don't necessarily have to sit in lane. In fact, they shouldn't be sitting in lane. Usually poor to average wave clear. There are some exceptions, but compared to some of the mages, it does tend to be a little bit worse. High mobility, usually low range, and they tend to play for early games, skirmishes in the river. It's generally a pretty aggressive playstyle, trying to get ahead early and just close out the game as soon as possible. Then we have some hybrids and outliers, so things that are playable in mid lane, but they don't necessarily fit into any of the two previous categories, so they can be either AD or AP. Usually played for early mid-game power. Not necessarily, but most of them are. Pretty good to average scaling, and there's a couple ones of here. I know sometimes people are surprised when they see Ahri as a hybrid, but technically you can play Ahri more mage style if you adjust your items. And due to her ult, she's a little bit more of an assassin, so it's a bit more of a hybrid. And then you've other outliers, so things like Lucian mid, which is a marksman, Irelia, which is situational pick as well, or the action. So here is just a tier list of the current patch mid laners. I'll also post it in the channel afterwards as well, if anyone wants to have a look. Everything, you can still play anything out of this list. This is not like, oh, don't touch B, or oh, don't touch, I don't know, A or something, only play S+. If you do happen to play champions that are in S+ or S, that's obviously awesome. But you can do a mixture out of all of them. Meta shifts all the time, and everything that's in B is also perfectly playable. Has some counters, but it's something you can get around. C is probably just in the weakest point right now. Again, it doesn't mean that it's impossible to climb with them. It just they feel a bit underwhelming right now in the meta. So let's talk about early game planning. And for those of you that have worked with me before, it's probably just a refresher. But I cannot stress this enough, and especially for new people, is to always try and analyze your matchup. When do you want to fight and how the fights are going to look like? So are you playing safe early game? Are we playing aggressive? What is your goal in this matchup? And usually just break it down into levels. So 1, 2, 3, 6, the more important levels. And trying to establish who is stronger. Are you stronger? Are they stronger? What am I going to take? What are they going to take? Again, this gives you more of a plan as to what you should be doing, what you should be looking out for. And it can also help you to prevent some unnecessary trades. So if you know, okay, level 1 I'm winning, it means you should be looking for level 1 trades. If it's a case where maybe level 1, level 2, your champion is relatively weak and you need level 3, then it basically means trying to avoid trades level 1 and level 2 so you don't lose too much HP, because otherwise you might not be able to trade on level 3. Now, there is a little bit more to trading. So one thing to add to that is what are win conditions for the trades to be in your favor? So what must happen in order for you to win it? And a simple thing can be like, okay, I need to dodge something or I need to land something. That's usually, I suppose, the most common things, right? But sometimes it might be like, oh, I need to wait for them to use this, or maybe I can try and bait something out, or maybe I just literally need to get in range and just land my spells, and that's all I need to take to actually win a trade. You can look for cooldown windows, so if enemies just threw spells on the wave, look to trade, because then they can't really hit you back, or they can't really hit you back much. So favorable trade is where you lost less HP than your enemy. Pretty basic. Now, bad trades can actually be favorable in some situations if you are running teleport. So basically what this means, and I will have an example later on as well, is let's say you have teleport advantage, you get back into lane. You can trade very, very heavily with your enemy if you know they don't have teleport. And what will that do is basically get both of you low. And obviously you don't want to overdo it, you don't want to accidentally end up dying. But you can go pretty low. And then you can actually use that and just step back, reset, and TP back in with full HP, full mana, probably an additional item as well. And if your enemy doesn't have that, then if they stay, they're gonna die. If they back off, then you can either freeze the wave, or you can shove the wave and take plating, or you can shove the wave and roam, and they can't really do much about that as well. So there are some exceptions where bad trades can be pretty good. And the other part as well is trying to poke enemies when they go to last hit minions. It's pretty simple, but I feel like a lot of people don't pay attention to it. And I feel like especially range champions should be doing this. And range versus melee matchups, maybe not all of the times, but I'd say 99% of the time, when the melee champion is going ahead to CS a minion, they should be hit with something. They should be hit with auto, they should be hit with an ability, trying to trade, unless you're obviously struggling with mana. And the last part is to try and avoid throwing low probability skill shots for the sake of casting something, or basically panicking, because some players do that as well. So sometimes it's actually better to hold on to an ability until there is a more convenient time to cast it. Those would usually be like CC spells. For example, let's say we're playing like Ahri versus Katarina matchup. How Ahri lands her charm can be very important whether she wins or loses the trade. So if she ends up throwing like low chance charm somewhere trying to catch Katarina between minions to poke her, and she misses, then Katarina, who is a pretty mobile champion, can obviously outplay it. Look to trade with Ahri. She doesn't have the charm, she can't really stop her, and the trade should be favorable for Katarina. So trying to avoid throwing out the low probability skill shots, there is usually a good moment as to when you want to throw them. And going back to our initial planning as to how trades should look like, or what you feel like they should look like, your win conditions for them, it's important to realize when you need to hold your spells until a certain thing happens, and when you can spam them a little bit more freely. So we're gonna talk briefly about wave management. So manipulating minion waves to fit your goals can be used in several different cases. So it can be used to avoid ganks, and you can also create gank opportunities for your own jungler. I always advise, if you think that your lane is set up for a gank, or if your enemy is pretty low, always ping on it. Make sure you get your jungler's attention, because a lot of them don't actually watch your lanes as much as they should, and they actually just miss out on those. So if you ping, you alert them that, hey, this is an option, and you don't necessarily have to take coin flippy fights. Now, sometimes if your jungler ignores you, and let's say you and enemy laner are both pretty low, you might still choose to coin flip. You might still choose that, okay, I'm going to be the better player, I'm not going to mess up, and that's fine. But there will also be situations where you feel like, okay, it's actually harder for you to win this 1v1 situation, and trying to get some assistance from your teammates as well. It can be used to create CS and experience advantage in lane, can be used to secure a better reset, can be used to create map pressure, so you can combine slow pushes into like crashing waves and roaming then when your enemy is stuck on their tower. So you can do a lot with this. Sometimes you might not have lane control, and that's fine. It depends on the matchup, it depends on champions. One champion might have a better wave lead than another, so you can't always force it. But there will be times when you still get to choose what happens to the wave, and when you do get to influence it, because your enemy is not going to be in lane 24/7. They're going to move at some point, and those points are when you want to try and still decide what is going on with the wave. So we're going to talk about slow pushes first, because slow pushes will tie in into freezing, and they will also tie in a little bit into roaming. So it's basically just wave slowly pushing one way or another. And I suppose that the main point about slow pushing that people don't understand is the point where the wave meets will determine what happens to it. So if an even wave, so we have 6 to 6 minions, regular wave, and it meets anywhere other than the middle of your lane, it will result in a slow push one way or another. So that basically happens because your next wave will arrive sooner than the enemy minions. So the next wave of your enemy, or whichever one is slow pushing, they need to walk longer. And during that time, there is a lot more minions on the other side that have arrived sooner. So this creates like more damage on one side, and this is basically what causes a slow push. So even if you don't touch a wave, if it's 6 to 6 but it meets anywhere other than middle, it will usually just create a slow push. So this is just one example of where the wave is gonna slow push. So the red line is where the wave meets, and the blue line is where the middle of the lane actually is. So that's one example here. And that's another one here. So usually when you crash a wave, and this is another thing that players tend to get a little bit confused about, being like, oh, I crashed the wave, I don't understand why it's not in the correct place. It's because depending on the time when you crash a wave and how big of a wave you crash, there might be some leftovers by the time the next wave arrives. So currently this wave, even though it's hitting the tower, is gonna influence this wave over here, because these minions are gonna stop in a second and they're gonna start hitting these creeps, and this actually also creates a slow push in this direction. So I'm gonna play it. I will speed it up a little bit because there's something else I want to show in this. So this continues on. Minions are only being last hit, so we're not pushing anything. And you can see how my wave ends up dying off over here. There are minions left over from the previous wave. And you can see the advantage here build up. So this continues on. Now pay attention to this Q because it impacts the back minions. And one more minion gets taken off. So a quick question, guys, if you don't mind answering in the chat. Can I freeze this? Is this going to freeze the way it is? Okay. Anyone else? Mm-hmm. So the queue that was drawn earlier actually ends up impacting this map, and we're gonna talk a little bit about freezes in a second and why it's not actually gonna freeze properly. So one thing to consider here is to look at the HP of the minions that we have in front of us, and also the fact that our next wave is a cannon wave. So I'm gonna let this play out. So even at this point here, when we look at it, we can see that the wave actually thinned out. And at this point, we ended up slow pushing towards the enemy. Alright, so let's talk about why it didn't work out, right? So freezing can be used to zone away enemies. You can create gold and XP lead with this as well. As previously mentioned, we can use this to create a gank opportunity. It can be used to farm at a safe point, especially for mages. If you ended up burning your flash and you're a pretty low mobile champion, you generally don't want to be pushing too much, or you don't want to be over pushing and being in a place where you don't need to be, unless you're like actively trying to shove the wave. Now there will be some exceptions to that. There are times when you do want to shove as a mage, either for reset, for pressure, to join a fight in the river, stuff like that. But if you are playing without a flash, you would generally be more cautious and you're trying to avoid farming like too far up. You can use it to deny minions either before recall or after enemy resets as well. Death timers are shorter, they are getting a little bit longer next patch, but early on, it's still sometimes actually better to just freeze a wave rather than trying to shove a wave. Especially in the very early stages of the game where you don't really have items, you might not have enough power to shove a wave, you may not have mana. And there will be times when it's just better to freeze rather than trying to shove. Mages would freeze more often than assassins who want to roam. So going back a little bit to what I said earlier about trying to be at a safe point. And the general rule is that you need 3 healthy minions or 3 healthy extra minions on your side. So you want 3 minions more than what you have, basically. So I have another quick video here. So if we look at this wave and we look at what is going on here. So we have more minions here. We have more caster minions. These are only being lasted, and pay attention. I know it might be a little bit hard to see because the cursor is pretty small. I do hover over the low HP minion, but I don't attack it because my minions are currently not aggroing it. So this is where the minion aggro is going. And this is important because sometimes people kill off minions that can last here a good while. So I'll let this play again. So this minion gets left alone. I move my cursor onto this minion because that's the one that's actually being targeted. It stops being targeted, so we don't hit it either. And now we can notice that this is actually the minion that's dropping the fastest. So this is probably the next one. Now this is a small tip when it comes to CSing, but also when it comes to setting up freezes and slow pushes, because it's actually very easy to accidentally influence a wave, and sometimes you will doing during trading as well. So it's just something to keep in mind as well. So this minion dies off. This one here is the next one. So waiting until it gets very low. Then there's this one. Then there's this one. And then we still have a good few minions left over here. You can keep a little bit extra for the cannon if you want. And then this continues on. So I will speed this up as well. Now the wave becomes a little bit too big. So there is a lot of minions here, right? We have a lot of those healthy casters as well as a cannon, which is both tanky and offering a lot of damage. So sometimes you will have to thin out the wave a little bit. Otherwise, especially if you need to hold it, you're going to be losing large amounts of HP. So this continues on. Now these minions end up being dragged up. And it is something that you might have seen players do as well. Which is generally just dragging them off so they don't crash on their tower. Whether you can do it or not might depend a little bit on your HP values as well. If you have potions, because you obviously don't want to lose too much HP. In general, you will find that, especially at lower ranks, you will not be using freezing a lot. You will probably primarily be using freezing when enemy resets and you have a large wave in front of you, or you have a cannon wave and you know that, okay, I probably can shove this on time and I don't want to be overextending by the time they get back here, because then I might be an easy target to get ganked. So sometimes you might choose to freeze that way. If you are really ahead, if you are really strong in lane, you might be able to zone the enemy from the wave. And it's especially effective on mages rather than assassins, because assassins generally just look to just kind of roam over the map and influence the map rather than just sit in lane. I suppose this kind of ties in a little bit with goals of our champions, right? Where mages generally want to take it slow, they want to scale up, and assassins want to take it pretty fast. They want to end the game as soon as possible. I sometimes try to freeze to have better trades as Yasuo versus mages. Yes, there are some champions which benefit out of freezes or even slow pushes. Irelia would be another one. Because Irelia really likes to play with the minions and all the dashes. So generally Irelia would try and freeze the wave and use the low HP minions to dash around, or even just slow pushes as well. So I have this game to review here. This was actually requested as well, so I'm gonna go over it. We're gonna go over it first few minutes. So this is an Orianna versus Malzahar matchup. Just for context, Malzahar is playing Comet over here. Unsure whether it was intentional or not. But going back a little bit, this game is actually pretty good for review because it takes a good few chunks out of what we spoke about, both in terms of trading, in terms of like bad trades. So trading aggressively when you have teleport up and how you can use it. Wave management is used as well for advantage. So if we talk a little bit about a matchup, we have Orianna scaling mage, we have Malzahar also a mage. So that is, let's say, relatively straightforward. Malzahar is pretty well known for his really good push and I suppose not a very interactive gameplay, right? Where Malzahar players generally just toss their abilities on the wave. The wave gets kind of in your face and most players get overwhelmed due to poor wave clear. So they kind of end up just stuck on the tower and Malzahar roams. That is the general idea as to how this matchup goes, right? So Orianna throws some autos and throws some Qs on the Malzahar early on, trying to poke him down a little bit. The autos on the minions help to keep up with the push for level 2 because Malzahar is probably going to cast something on the wave. You can notice how she's repositioning pretty high up to keep poking him. Now this is important, right? And especially if you pay attention to what happens here and what we spoke about earlier in terms of cooldown windows. So he throws an ability on this minion. Orianna has Q up and she's not playing back because technically she doesn't have to play back. Even though Malzahar is so good at pushing, his trades are not really all that strong in the early game either. So usually they just play it through waves, and that's how they get through the early game. But it is something that you can play around, and this aggressive positioning is actually what makes it work. So I'll play this again. So it gets a bit more damage over there, backs off to drop the minion aggro. Now she has level 2 priority already. We have 3 minions left over to 1 minion left over. Continues trading. More poke. Hits level 2. Continues poking. Another one. Accidentally tanks a tower shot. So that is a little bit unfortunate. But still the trade is huge. And this helps a lot in what is about to come. Because this actually generates a huge lead. So potions are going. Keep an eye that the ball is still in aggressive positioning. And Orianna is positioning aggressively as well. So if Malzahar steps up, she's trying to match his positioning. Throws the Q doesn't land, that's okay. He hits 2. Again, spell on the wave. Immediately gets hit with abilities. And starts resetting. So the wave gets shoved. Orianna backs here. So I'm gonna fast forward a little bit when we get back into lane. She walks back the lane because that was a pretty big wave that crashed. So it generated a slow push. She ends up missing the 2 melee minions up the front, but saves the TP. So right now she has teleport advantage over Malzahar, who TP'd immediately. So the wave is kept over here. She steps in front of it, trades a little bit. Baits out the comet and then immediately steps back so she doesn't actually get hit. Now some CSing goes on since the minions are actually coming on the tower. Now he pops his spells. She continues on. She's running phase rush as well, so that provides some nice movement speed. As you can see, like the trade overall, it's not too bad, but it's an even trade, right? Like it doesn't end up hugely of an advantage for Orianna. Now what helps a lot is she has refillable, but she also still has TP. So keeping that in mind, she can actually go pretty aggressive. And even if she loses the same amount of HP as Malzahar, she still has a pretty much get out of jail free card. So she goes for very aggressive trades over here. Loses a bunch of HP. Loses a bunch of mana. Wave gets stuck here, which is overall a pretty good opportunity for a gank as well. But Malzahar backs off. So I'll fast forward this a little bit. He comes back here. So now we have a cannon wave, right? And he's very low on mana. So he's going to struggle with that one. So Orianna does her buy, picks up a tear and an amplifying tome, TPs immediately, and then she drags the wave over here so it doesn't crash, and drops the aggro in the bush. So we end up holding the wave here. So I'll fast forward a little bit. So this continues on, and Orianna actually has a pretty good XP advantage already. Now Malzahar gets back into lane. Keep in mind how Orianna is close to hitting 7, and Malzahar is still 5. He's going to be hitting 6 soon. Pokes down the shield. Just stays in lane, stays at her side. Now, the fact that he keeps throwing spells on the wave obviously favors Orianna, because in normal conditions, eventually, especially through all of those trades and the fact that then she would be the person that takes the minion aggro, this would obviously influence the wave in Malzahar's advantage. but he actually just keeps drawing the spells on the wave as usual. You can see here, he doesn't even attempt to trade with her. He ends up like trying to put spells on the wave, and immediately the second he does that, Oriana casts her spells on him. So we have a bit of an ult exchange. Minion actually steps under the cursor the moment she flashes, but still manages to get him. So then we shove the lane. And reset. So some minions were obviously misclicked throughout all of this, and they were kind of sacrificed for the sake of trading. Some of them were just misclicked. But it's still good to kind of keep it in mind that sometimes it's worth to trade some minions if it lands you a very favorable trade. So I'll fast forward this a little bit. So this would be an example where we're gonna end up slow pushing towards them, but right now we still have the advantage. So Oriana ends up standing up pretty aggressively and just continues trading here. Continue CSing. Now Leona's on her side, so she kind of stops a little bit with the aggression, trying to let him push back to see if maybe they can do something, but unfortunately the timer for Leona Rome was just a little bit off in terms of what was happening in mid lane. Right hand side is warded, Oriana wards the left hand side, and then she continues playing towards left hand side. Pops the spell shield. Pokes him some more. Didn't even need to actually use the E back to herself there. Interrupts the ult. Nice ult channel. Crashes a big wave. Goes for the planing. Shyvana shows up, so Oriana is forced to back off here. Gets her reset in, gets her first item. So overall, she's at 64 CS at 10 minutes, so it's nothing extraordinary. But she has 2 kills, and she has 2 levels advantage. And we're just gonna push it a little bit more. So this continues on for a while. It's just a matter of trading, finding those little trade opportunities. Once TP is back up, she starts trading a bit more aggressively as well and trading larger chunks of HP. Again, we're to the left-hand side because she's playing towards the left-hand side. Okay, so I think he ends up getting away here. Then there's a play on the tower. So he ults, Oriana goes for combo. Actually missed an auto just before she flashed because he should have died here. But one way or another, Malzahar can lane, right? And ideally, yes, you want to kill your enemy, but sometimes, even if you force them out of lane, that by itself is an advantage. So Oriana backs. Gets back into lane. She walks the lane to keep the teleport. Skip too far. Because she actually starts bullying the Malzahar even worse somewhere here. Gets him. There's just no way he can win trades from this point onwards. Continues pushing. One more wave, one more wave. Keeps up the pressure because her jungler was doing dragon. Technically, she could have just let the wave bounce back into her, but since her jungler was actually doing something proactive, she stayed and she shoved the wave. Gets back into the lane. Zones away the Malzahar as much as possible. I think this is the point where she just bullies him under the tower. So at this point, it's very hard for Malzahar to even just step out from under his own tower. And unfortunately, the tower actually is not as safe as he would like to be because of how strong Orianna is now. So he pretty much just stayed on the tower and that was enough. So we're gonna pause this one here because I basically just wanted to cover a little bit of the early game. Because as I said, it kind of combines what we talked about. So plan for the game, being aggressive in the early levels, using cooldown windows. When Malzahar throws spells on the wave, Orianna trades. Using teleport as well for not just CS advantage, but also pressure advantage, because she does end up like 3 levels ahead at the end of it. Still keeps up with the items, has a lot of pressure from mid as well. Warding helps a lot because she had wards on the right hand side from her support, and she also mostly just warded the left hand side where she positioned to. So that is also important, because if you want to play this aggressive as a mage without your flash, you need to know where the jungler is or have a general idea where they could be. Playing towards your vision points to keep yourself relatively safe. Those things are very, very important. I got a question about some mage matchups, okay? If I'm playing Zed versus Xerath or any similar mage with huge range, the weakness of the mage is usually if you close in the range, you get the advantage. But if a Xerath waits for the minions to get close to half HP, then just uses Cure from max range, then W. Shoves the wave, walks out of your range. How do you trade with him or punish him? Because if you dash after the wave is cleared, it's really easy for him to use E. And after the stun is over, his cooldowns are back again and your dash isn't. That's actually a pretty tough matchup to be playing against, because Xerath, I suppose, is something that is usually countered by long range, or something similar to long range that can look to match him. So for an assassin, it's very, very difficult to kind of deal with that. And I mean, you can look for something if he throws the spells on the wave, but obviously, like, you're probably still gonna get stunned. So as a Zed, I think the only thing that you're looking for is maybe look to step up and throw your WQE combo, but you're probably not recasting to go there. So you're trying to poke him down with the W and the Qs, but you're probably not gonna get anywhere near him or try to get anywhere near him until you feel like he's in your lethal range, and you can just flash his stun and then just, you know, finish him off with Ignite and the rest of your combo. But Xerath is probably one of the matchups that is pretty rough to deal with. So I hope that answers the question at least a little bit. Any other question, guys? If you have any questions about anything that's being said, feel free to do so. If you want to ask right now, or we can keep it until the Q&A at the end, up to you. I usually go Doran's in second wind because of his cooldowns to have some sustain, and that helps. Yeah, I'd imagine that should be of a lot of help. I was wondering if I could incorporate the usual aggressive playstyle. Yeah, if anything, I think you need to use the W to extend your Q range, or even look for your WE, but you're probably not actually recasting the shadow to get on top of him until he gets low enough. And in some cases, you can do that until 6. And obviously, once you have your ult, the chances of him missing the E are a lot higher. Or if you have your flash up, you can also just anticipate, okay, the moment the animation starts casting is when you want to flash. Or if you still have your ult, you can do that. You know, whatever you're able to do at the time with your mechanics. Okay. If no other questions, we will move over to our camera control. So the thing about mid is, as the name implies, is in the middle of the map, which can be a little bit of a double-edged sword, with advantages and disadvantages. So the huge advantage that mid lane has over other roles is that mid laners have access to roams to both side lanes and both river sides, which allows you to impact the map a little bit more freely. Because, for example, as a top laner, if you're ever roaming, and I know generally top laners don't roam, but if you're ever roaming as a top laner, you're usually roaming towards mid or UTP to bot lane. That is generally how it goes. But then obviously that requires you to use a teleport as your summoner spell. Supports, I know some supports can obviously have their own ideas and roam topside, but usually they would only roam towards mid lane, which is closest, and then get back into the lane. So this is a huge advantage for mid laners. The downside is that you can generally be quite easily ganked from several different angles. So you need to use your words every now and again. Obviously depends on what you're playing. If you're playing something mobile that might be difficult to catch off guard, you will have a lot more freedom. But for other champions that don't have high mobility, you generally need to rely a good bit on the wording, playing towards that side, and any information you can gather from your map as well about where the enemies are. They're all very important. The thing about mid lane, and probably one of the biggest advantages mid lane has as well in the game, is that your games can be won through 1v1 in a lane, but they can also be won through roams. So you don't necessarily have to be stuck in a bad matchup, and this usually comes down more towards assassins than it does towards mages, which is the one advantage they do have in the playstyle. Is it's not like you can just ditch mid lane entirely and never come back kind of thing. But I suppose it's a lot more forgiving if you do choose to give up a wave for a roam, and you know, you can get some kills somewhere else, in the river, in the enemy jungle, in bot lane, in top lane. So you don't always have to win mid lane to be able to do something. Sometimes you might play it through your wave management. You know, like mages generally facing assassins, they want to try and play safe, but they also want to try and keep assassins in lane. Because by default, if a mage is sitting in lane and they're farming up, they're winning against assassins that will fall off in terms of scaling later. So if as an assassin you're just going even and, like, you know, you basically shake hands and you're both just kind of chilling in mid, not doing anything, the mage is gonna win long term. Or at least they should. Anyway, obviously depends on the game and what is going on in the game with the teammates and stuff. But usually it means that they will have an advantage. So it kind of comes down again to talking about our goals for different champions. But it is something to consider. Some players are better mechanically than others. Some have just higher capabilities. All mechanics and all levels of mechanics can be raised up with coaching, with enough effort from the student as well. But different people will have different capabilities, and not everyone is going to be faker, not everyone's going to be a mechanical god. And that's okay as well, because that's not the only way to play the game, it's not the only way to get ahead. Finding a good roam opportunity can impact the game, so it can be huge if you do move in somewhere, and especially if you do pick up a bunch of kills. But even if you just pick up a bunch of assists, your roam can lead to a lot. It can lead to towers being taken faster. It can open up an opportunity to do an objective as well. It can create more pressure in the jungle. It can impact quite a few things. On the other hand, roaming on a bad timer will make you fall behind, and it's gonna suck. You're gonna feel it quite a lot. So mages generally need higher probability roams than assassins. So what I mean by that is that assassins, because they want to try and close out the game as soon as possible, sometimes they see a play and it's kind of 50-50, and they're still gonna go and take it. Mages, on the other hand, because they're scaling, because they need time, they need to hit their item spikes, they need usually at least 2 or 3 items to start being significant in the game. In a 50-50 play, if it goes downhill, it can go downhill very bad for them, and it can really slow down when they actually hit their items and become relevant. So mages are a little bit more cautious with roams, and they would generally not move until the play is more in their favor. So it's maybe like 60% of winning that fight or whatever it is, or higher, rather than just coin flipping it. I suppose first thing about roaming is you want to try and gather information. And the best way to gather information is to actually look at other lanes. You can look at your minimap as well, but minimap gives limited information. So it tells you a general idea as to where people are on the map. It doesn't tell you anything about the HP and mana values. It doesn't tell you anything about wave states. And this is where understanding slow pushes as well is very, very helpful to roaming. Because if you look at the lane, and it can be a case where, like, okay, you look at your minimap and the icons of the enemies are under their own tower. And generally you would assume, okay, well, they're under tower, and unless we can dive, which sometimes you might, and it might be a great opportunity, but sometimes you might not want to do that. Your general idea might be like, oh, well, then I'm not even gonna bother, trying to potentially go there soon because they're on the tower. Now, if you look at that lane, you might actually see things such as, okay, maybe they're super low and we can just dive. It's gonna be quick in and out and back to mid lane. Or maybe you might notice that, okay, they're getting low, and looking at the wave, okay, they're under tower now, but actually they have a big wave building up that is gonna push towards us. And this feeds you information that, okay, this is slow pushing towards us. So on the next wave, they should be in a place where I can actually do things. Now, this ties in a little bit with planning ahead, I suppose. But it is something that will help you a lot. So it is a really good habit to get into, to start looking around when you do have free time. It's obviously more important for assassins, but for mages, it's also good to know what is going on around you. And especially if you're playing teleport, which most mages would be these days, it's also a good idea to have a look around, because you might need to TP, or you might be able to TP and turn a fight. When you're looking around and you're gathering information, you're also more likely to choose the right one. If you just automatically click somewhere without really looking at what's going on, you don't know if this is the best possible case. And yes, sometimes there might be things like, okay, maybe there's nobody in top lane at all, so obviously roaming top is not an option, so you just automatically go bot lane. And in some cases, that's going to be perfectly fine. In some other cases, you're going to waste time when you should have been taking a plating. In some other times, you might have an option of roaming both top and bot. And one might be easier than another, just based on the champions, or just based on like HP and mana values. You generally don't want to go for like the really risky plays towards champions that might be difficult to kill, or champions that are very fed. So you generally avoid those. Getting in the habit of checking what is going on around you. So basically trying to look at the lanes, but also any sort of fights that are happening in the river before you head into them. Because you don't want to waste time walking into something that's going to be done before you even get there. Or like by the time you're halfway there. And you could have done something else in that time. You could have shoved the wave and crashed it and taken plating. You could have just shoved the wave and reset, or maybe just roam towards the other side. There are things that you can do, but sometimes players just lose time walking towards somewhere that is just going to be pretty much a waste of time. Usually with roams, you want to try and get a shove or a slow push into a shove before you roam. So you want to crash a wave, keep your enemy under tower, and then that's when you make a move, and that's when you don't actually miss out on minions. Now, this is your ideal scenario, and this is where slow pushes can be pretty useful. But sometimes it doesn't work out this way. So especially if you're in a matchup where you might not have wave clear control, you sometimes have to give up a wave. And that usually comes down for assassins, is that you're going to basically have to skip a wave if you want to try and get something done. It's less worth the higher up you go in ranks, but generally if you're under low diamond, don't worry about it too much unless you're losing so many waves. The only thing I'd recommend to avoid is roaming on a cannon wave. So up to 15 minutes, every third wave is your cannon wave. And the reason why I recommend avoiding to roam on that specific wave is because you're losing a lot more gold and XP due to cannon, as well as the cannons being a lot more powerful. So usually your enemy will be able to get at least one, if not two. And usually it would be two platings while you roamed. And that can be pretty problematic, especially if you don't have teleport to get back into the lane. So I have a few examples of camera control. There's obviously a lot more, guys. Some of those videos are a little bit old, but they're pretty good in what I want to show you. Some clips here. In those, I have 2 recordings, 2 clips there from Faker, from the king himself. So you're always going to take something out of watching those anyway. So I just want to show you these 2 examples here. So over here, he's playing Ari. He's walking back the lane, and one thing he does is as he's walking back the lane, he's actually watching what is going on around him. So he's watching the fight in top side. He's pinging summoners that are actually being used as well to help his teammates. He gets back into the lane. He's still trying to have a glance at what is going on around. He gets to the next wave, starts immediately shoving it. Is stealing short glances at bot lane. Now, he's using F keys. Some players will prefer to do that with their keyboard and just recenter. So he basically shoved that wave. He's spectating the bot lane as he's walking. Realize, okay, that's it. The guy is dead. And then he immediately just turned back. So he doesn't waste any more time than is necessary. Now, he doesn't get a lot out of this one, right? This is just a very basic idea of using the camera when you're not really using much. Although the shove into roam would have paid off in that particular case. But this next video might actually be a little bit better. So he's playing Talon in this one. He pushes a wave a little bit. He starts walking down towards bottom side. His jungler and bot laners are there. And keep in mind, all have ults. Ashe has ults. Lilia has ults. He notices that enemies backed off from under tower. So he just goes back mid. So he stopped halfway. Was just spectating what's going on. Deemed that, okay, we're not doing anything right this very minute. So he goes back to mid lane. Keeps shoving this. Zoe, who thought he's gonna commit, wasted time, so he actually still gets prio on top of her. Moves down. And now they actually have a better tempo. They have a better wave setup coming in as well. So he keeps spectating what's going on. Waits for Lilia ult. They commit here. And they just pretty much finish this before Zoe even gets here. So you can do that. You can hover down in the fog of war. That by itself can create pressure. That by itself can cause people to step back. Now, obviously not always. We're talking solo queue. And sometimes teammates don't respect as much as they should. But it is something that you can use. You don't have to go the full way down. So for practicing camera control, you can obviously use your F keys. Some people prefer to use the mouse. F keys can be rebound as well, because for some people they're uncomfortable. You can bind them to other stuff. The most important one is, regardless of whether you're using mouse or F keys, is just to be comfortable with your recenter button, because especially as you're doing things, you want to try and switch back to yourself relatively fast. So by default it's on spacebar, but that can be changed as well to whatever feels comfortable. I have it on a mouse scroll button, and that works better for me. I have something else on spacebar. If spacebar works, that's fine. That's, I suppose, the only thing between the F keys and the mouse is just your recenter button should be something that you use when you're looking at roams. how do you deal with impatient junglers? For example, in the melee versus range matchup, at low levels you don't have wave agency, you're under tower and the jungle goes for a scuttle fight. I could go there and help out, but I would lose a huge wave and it's never guaranteed it's gonna go good. So how do I play that ideally? Usually what I would do is I would start pinging caution in advance a little bit on, like, I don't know, even 10 seconds before a scuttle spawns or something. If you're using chat, you can also ping that you won't have prior, trying to ping them back. Now, sometimes you just can't influence them, right? Because whether you're using chat or you're not using chat if it's switched off, or even your jungler might have chat muted and might not even see that. So trying to ping them off is the only way, really. If the wave is really big, you just stay in lane, and as much as that sucks, you kind of have to let that happen because you can't control everything. And you've tried warning him. It's his bad for going for something without prio and not checking. So there's that. If the wave is slowly coming your way and you feel like you might be able to still go there and help, then you can try. I wouldn't overly commit though, because if you're gonna die, you're gonna miss out on that huge wave. So if you feel like it looks very dodgy, it doesn't look good, just don't commit to anything and just step back into your lane if possible. But yeah, I would usually try and ping in advance, either on the scuttle or on the scuttle and on your lane, to kind of try and get their attention. And if that doesn't work, then, you know, there's only so much that you can do. You can screw over your lane for his scuttle because, as you said, there's plenty of cases where it's just gonna go bad really fast, right? Obviously depends on the champions, depends on like HP values, but top laners can get involved as well. It might not even necessarily be like a 2v2, it might turn into a 3v3. A lot of variables come into it, and, you know, it might be pretty flippy. So if you can't, then you just can't, and you want to try and ping him off a little bit earlier before he starts scuttle. Because once he starts it, he's not gonna leave it. That's usually how how solo queue teammates go, is they're not gonna leave it. So the best thing you can do is just try and I suppose warn them ahead of time. It's the same with plays, right? Is if play is already in motion, if people are fighting, the fact that you ping caution or like ping them to back off, there will be some exceptions where they will actually back off, but most of them will not because it's already in motion. And the best way to stop that would have been to ping it before it went in motion. So I'm afraid there's only so much you can do about this one. Okay, so we've seen this one. So I suppose you guys will actually be the first ones to hear about this. This will get posted later on the Discord as well. It's a community bootcamp that I am going to be running in August. So yeah, I suppose you kind of get to hear about it a little bit ahead of time. As to what it actually includes, and there is a paid option and there is also a free option to participate as well. So I will have a little comparison as well as to what you get, like visual one, because I feel like this might not be as clear as I like it to be. But basically it's open to all roles. There will be classes for roles, like specifically dedicated to roles, so we're not mixing up too much. The paid option includes private VOD review. So you basically get 2 VOD reviews, one in the first week and one in the third week of the bootcamp as well. You will have assignments to complete. Now, assignments are not super tricky or anything like that. They're basically tasks for you to complete, like playing games or playing games with specific champions, having specific CS at a certain time, stuff like that. So it's nothing overly complicated, but things that you should be working on. And obviously in the private VOD reviews as well, we're going to set out goals as to what you should be focusing on. Additional videos to go over, progress tracker, and 4 group classes with game reviews. So that's for the paid option. And if we have 15 people or less, it's going to be €30. Usually the cost of that would be 60 for 2 VODs and some extras as well. So all the assignments, videos, progress tracker, all of that basically. If we can get up to 20, it goes down to 25. And if we can get over 20 people, then it goes down to €15. So it's pretty much a 75% saving. So the more people participate, the cheaper it gets for everyone else. And it would be starting next week on the 12th of August and finishing on the 8th of September. The free option instead is there are 2 OPGG reviews. So again, it would be similar. First week, third week, having a look at how you're getting on, making recommendations, assignments to complete also there, and access to the group sessions. So as I said, I will put this, I already have it actually, the graphic made up into a more, I suppose, understandable way of looking at it as to what comes with what. But it's just a general idea as to what we are going to be going ahead with. So this brings us to our finish time. So we're going to do Q&A. Guys, do we have any questions in the chat? Anything else that you'd like to ask about? Either about anything that we discussed previously here, or any general Midlane questions?